Hey everybody. Today I'm going to talk about your next project. And so for this project, we are going to be creating portraits. And the way that we're going to think about portraits is a little bit different than a traditional way. So our main focus is to collect some information about ourselves and transform that into what we will call a data portrait. Now, you're familiar with portraits and their powerful ability to tell us stories about people, like this portrait of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The upward glance, the light hitting his face from above, communicates to us his spiritual commitment and centeredness. It lets us know that his focus is not, in a sense, earthly justice, but more of a divine inspired justice. And as I highlight in the notes here, his sense of calm connectedness really communicates a sense of power. By contrast, this portrait of a young girl shows her kind of lost in her inner world. She seems more isolated. So even though the light is hitting her face, it's hitting it from below. Her eyes are looking down and away. There's more of an avoidance to look at anything because her torso is facing us, but her head turns away. So there's a disengagement that we see in a portrait like this. Courbet portrait is fairly famous, but as he pulls his hair out of his face, we notice a couple things. One, his eyes are super intense, which has long been a point of connection between artists and how we understand their job, this power of seeing. But we also see his hands look incredibly strong, like he's somebody who uses his hands, which, in addition to the intense gaze, the strength of the hands, we really start to understand his work a little bit. Now, Frida's double self portrait, the two Fridas, is probably one of her more famous ones. And in this portrait, she shows herself twice, one in traditional clothes, one where she's wearing contemporary clothes from the time where she lived. Now, she did this portrait shortly after her divorce, and it was a story of how she was breaking with tradition just by having a divorce, but also lets us know some of the pain and uncomfortableness that she was feeling, kind of a split in her thinking about the decision she made. But what we really want to think about too is this practice of data visualization, which is something that artists and designers engage in all the time. And data visualization is a way that we represent information. And traditionally, we use it through things like charts, graphs, and maps. So one of the data visualizations that you've seen in this class is the bandwidth of the senses, where we have a sense of how much we see and how much information is taken in through our eyes compared with how much information we take in on our other senses. Now, when we visualize information, we create new perspectives. So this map of Chicago shows every individual household and how they report their race and ethnicity. We can see patterns in the map, and we can raise some really important questions. This one shows the fastest animal in the world. And when we look at the fastest animals, we can see that the size of the bar is relative to one another. So the sailfish is just under a third of the size of the falcon, as the number is just under a third as fast. Time-lapse photographs can also be data visualizations. This one shows the patterns of bird movement on and off a wire. And we wouldn't notice these things with our naked eye, but what we see is there's a way that these birds curve that is consistent across all their flight patterns. And this one is a particularly famous one about Napoleon's march into Russia. In the width of the line that starts as this fleshy pink color moving from left to right shows the amount of troops he had. And The black line shows the amount of troops he had on his return journey. But the thing about data visualization is that it helps us understand text and numbers in a new way. Because we see so much visually and our vision is so powerful, it communicates information much faster and much more efficiently. Now, artists use visualization as well. Um, we've talked about Dennis Wood in the past and how he takes maps of his hometown. And this map shows the markings on the concrete where people wrote their notes, where they put a footprint on fresh concrete. Now, the same town can be depicted in terms of its wind chimes, or in terms of its porch lights, or in terms of its fences and borders throughout the town. Now, the thing about each of Dennis Wood's maps is that it's a layer and it gives us new information and a new perspective about the same town. Different than just seeing the houses or seeing all of those parts at once, it helps us focus in and understand some of the structure that goes into this neighborhood. This is an artist who used a lathe, which is a traditional woodworking tool, to make circles, and each circle shows the number of terror incidents in the world from 1945 to 2017. They start on the smaller side and then proceed to the larger side, but making them in the form of worry beads like somebody would use as a fidget. These two artists collected their data digitally. They used MoodScope, Fitbit, Track Your Happiness, and took that data and wove it into patterns to make tapestries, with the vertical parts of the weave being the Fitbit data and the horizontal parts being the mood data. In this project, Dear Data, where two designers sent each other postcards every week about what they did. So these things were very mundane, things like what kind of food they ate, how many times they said thank you, how many times they were late, how many times they checked the clock. And they came up with their own coding to communicate a little bit about their lives to one another in a visual way. So a data portrait, though, is going to be a way that we visualize data about ourselves and link it to some type of portrait. Now, this is a data portrait from a college student that depicts their life from age 14 to 20. The bottom third shows us the closeness of relationship they have with different family members through those years. And you can see that dad in green drops off pretty sharply right around 14 and never really picks back up. But Zach and Jordan, on the other hand, start a little bit lower, and the closeness to both of them grows significantly as this person gets closer to age 20. The circles through the middle show their main activities in their life, and the yellow and red along the top show the level of stress that this individual has. This is another data portrait that, instead of being depicted horizontally, uses a radial pattern, which tells us a different kind of story about their life, one that we can ask some questions about at the end of this presentation. But your main job is going to collect and report some data about yourself in a visualized portrait. And I'd like to share some student work. So this student collected work, and you can see the way that she organized her plans on the left. She took notes, thought about the data she wanted to collect, how she's going to depict it, how she's going to compose her page. And then the grid on the top left is where she kept track of all of her information. The portrait on the right includes her data, labels it, and lets us know a little bit about the number of times she experienced those things at different points in the day. Here's a close-up of another data collection plan. And you can see the one on the right, the student talked about where these things occurred, whether they're in imaginary places like an online game, personal spaces like a bedroom, or public spaces like a library or school. This student did a data portrait of their mood and the location. And the location is shown with different kinds of birds, and the mood is shown by the color of the birds. And you can see the whole thing looks like a regular work of artwork by itself. But when we realize that there's a code here that's telling us and giving us a glimpse into the student's life, we get new insights into how things are going for them. This student took data on the importance of conversations. So who they were with and how important they were is shown by size and color. The student used photography and kept track of how many times she said sorry. Another one about mood. This one is kind of a dashboard where the student took track of how their responsibilities went, what they did with family, what they did with their time, and how their day went and what they did over the course of the week is the one on the right. This one, levels of stress depicted in different colors in watercolor and telling us a little bit about the level of stress each of those days. This one, when they were eating and how they were feeling on the right, and on the left, also stress, but what time of day those stresses occurred. This student did a map of Franklin and where he had a song in his head. And you can see that in room 206, in my room, had a lot of rap, R&B, but mostly a lot of country music, which came as a huge shock to me when I saw it. Students kept track of how often they checked their phone. And one student at one point said how many times their language arts teacher told the class to be quiet. And it looks like second period gets a little loud on Friday. So your work, in addition to watching this and to hand in on Thursday, is to pick a feature of your life that you can track. Now, as you saw, students use everything from their mood to the music in their mind. Students also use their habits, from how many times they checked their phone to how many times they laughed or the conversations they held. Your job is to pick a aspect of your day that you can keep track of, starting on Thursday and going for over a whole week. So we're going to be keeping track of your data every day for from now until about a week from now. And then the second thing is I want you to think about data you can pair with it. So if you're keeping track of something like the music that you're listening to or thinking about, I want you to think about where you're listening to it. I want you to think about, who you're listening to it around, or who do you talk to beforehand. And I want you to think about, or could you think about the time that it occurs? In all of those cases, you want to have one bit of data that you're looking at, but another piece that you can relate to it. The time, the place, the people, even as we saw in some of those student examples, the level of importance that it has for you. So I'm going to go ahead and post a PDF of this slideshow. I'm going to ask you for tomorrow to review the slides, answer a couple questions, and then also let me know what are those two kinds of features of data that you are going to keep track of for the week ahead. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them over. I'm happy to ask. I anticipate we can have some conversation about this as you're picking the right thing that you're going to want to make your portrait